Hello, everybody. Welcome to TAM Integration and Silo Health's preparation, Psychedelic Preparation 101. We are really glad you're here, and we're really excited to be able to share this information and to just commune with you and to answer your questions and hear where you're at and just, be support for you, on lots of levels, informationally, intellectually, maybe in a heart-centered way, emotionally, in any way that we can. It's important to us. That's why we're here. Um, so TAM integration is, I'll introduce myself. I'll let Dr. Saad introduce himself next. Um, I'm Daniel Shankin. I'm the founder of Mount Tam Psychedelic Integration. And Mount Tam Psychedelic Integration is a community of folks who are deeply committed to personal transformation, spiritual healing, um, personal growth, and the like, and who often use or are curious about using psychedelics, plant medicines, and entheogens to support that process. And we gather together in various kinds of circles and educational events in order to be that kind of support for each other, so that hopefully it's not just about the folks you see up here on the stage, but it's about people giving and receiving to each and every one of you. What is Mount Tam? Mount Tam is a beautiful mountain in lovely Marin County, short for Mount Tamalpais. And that's what that is. Dr. Saad, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Welcome here today. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Dr. Saad. I hold my doctorate in pharmacy. By trade, I am a pharmacist, pharmacy manager, but by passion, I am a psychedelic educator and advocate. Um, I'm the founder of Silo Health, and Silo Health is a community of clinicians, professionals, patients, all geared toward the education, legislation, and integration of all things surrounding psilocybin. So in the process right now, we are working on accessible, affordable certification programs to promote an idea of healer inclusivity. Our first program that we'll be rolling out is a psilocybin peer supporter certification program. And we offer free weekly integration workshops to support access to collaboratively processing past experiences, whether they be challenging or enlightening. And I'm very excited to share the stage with Daniel here. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm really excited to see how today goes.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. We're hoping to do this once a month and to focus on a different molecule each month.
Yeah.
Today is psilocybin,
Oh yeah.
and so the way we're going to do it is we'll do a little bit of a meditation together, because that's kind of what happens at TAM integration circles. We feel that meditative mindful practices are supremely important for preparation and integration, and we'll even talk a little bit about why that is. And then I'll go from my meditation into just, I think I have 4 slides. Right? So I'll show you 4 slides, and then I'll turn it over, and Saad will talk about a little bit of the science, some more practical nuts and bolts things that, quite frankly, are often lost on me. And then we will open it up, and you are welcome to ask questions. You're welcome to share your story. One thing that I would, I will promise you that to the best of our ability, we're not going to lay our trips on you. Like, we're here to support you. I'm not here, our advice will be light. It will probably be more along the lines of kind of reflection or relating, our experience to you. Nobody's here to tell you what to do. There's certainly no medical advice. There's no um, pressure, right? So we're here more to kind of listen and share our experience and our knowledge than to, yeah, than to sort of make you feel like you need to do something a certain way. So hopefully that feels good. So what I'm going to ask us to do is to find a shape that you can relax in. So a seated position, probably most of you are in a seated position, and see if you can allow your body to align, right? The crown of the head over the seat, and making sure there's a lot of room for breath and relaxing any musculature that might be inhibiting your breathing. So if you feel like your jaw is tight, your throat is tight, your chest is tight, or your belly, just see if you can relax those to make more room for breathing. And this is a practice actually that can go very deep. Is that all we have to do is look for what's tense or tight and let it go. And just become progressively more relaxed. And relaxation almost seems trite at first. I think when I first thought of the idea of relaxation as a spiritual practice, I thought that was silly, and I maybe pictured people sitting by a pool with umbrella drinks. But when we really go into it, we see that we're not just relaxing the body, we are relaxing deeply held tension in the mind. We're relaxing our struggles with the past, present, and future. And we're becoming progressively more and more okay with reality as it is. So just take a few more moments. And I'm going to ask you to simply just become more and more okay with reality as it is. That this moment is good. This moment's good enough. Yes, the world is difficult. Yes, there are things that need to be changed. There are injustices that need to be righted. But for right now, we will relax into the okayness of this moment to actually make us more resourceful to change the things that need changing later. So it's a moment for you to rejuvenate, as well as a moment for you to come face to face with reality. Just about 5 more breaths like this. And just see if you can maintain some of this relaxation, some of this easefulness in your body, and some of this depth of breath as you begin to open your eyes. Excellent. Cool. Thank you for joining me in that. I'm going to share my screen. Let's admit another person. And I'll share my screen. And just a few slides on some preparation Do you see the Psychedelic Preparation 101? Cool. Don't panic, right? I don't know if any of you grew up with this book, with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but I did. And I think that this phrase is supremely important for all of life and also for the psychedelic experience. What I am thinking of right now is the moment when psilocybin starts to take hold, right? When we start to feel it, we sometimes feel anxiety, we sometimes feel panic, and there can be this instinct to grasp for control, right? This instinct to try and make the psilocybin do what we want it to do, or to make sure that we're having the experience we think we're supposed to have. And all that ends up doing is making our body more tight and tense, right? And as you know, as you probably have noticed from doing just 3 to 5 minutes of relaxation, you probably feel a little better, right? When your muscles tighten up and you get very tense and you panic, you naturally feel worse. And so you're basically adding insult to injury. And so the recommendation is to go with the flow, to relax more deeply, to allow yourself to be curious, right? So don't panic. This is a quote that I like from a teacher named Chogyam Trungpa. He founded the Shambhala School in Naropa University in Boulder. And one of his students asked him, what is merit? There's this idea in Buddhist meditation of merit, of accumulating merit. And you do practices to accumulate merit. And I believe that this student kind of thought that it was almost like a material object that you would, like it was almost like, bonus points or something like that. And Trungpa said, merit is the sense of satisfaction that comes from not complicating your own confusion. The best way to gain merit is to sit and do nothing, right? And so this moment of come up when the psychedelics start to take hold, and it is sometimes confusing if you're, and this can happen even for people who are experienced. It happens a lot for people who are new. Um, that it is a tad confusing, and it's like, what do I do with this confusion? And the worst thing that you can do when you're confused is to complicate it, to make matters worse, right? To try and somehow fix it or make it stop or push it back down or fight it in some way. And so the best way to deal with confusion is to just note, oh, that's confusion. Okay, I'm going to sit and do nothing, right? Just a few thoughts on this. Do not give way to astonishment, Terence McKenna, right? So Terence McKenna, and this was, he was not necessarily talking about psilocybin when he was talking about this. He was talking about DMT, which we'll cover in a few months at some point. And he was being visited by elves. So that's one of the cool things about psychedelics is sometimes there are elves, right? Sometimes there are elves, sometimes there's ancestors, sometimes there's aliens, fairies. Um, there was a comedian named Duncan Trussell who once said when he was in drug education class in high school, they said, don't do LSD, you'll see dragons. And he was like, I want to see dragons. Right? So anyway, so Terence McKenna saw elves, and the elves says, do not give way to astonishment. Right? They basically said, don't panic. Right? The elves could have as easily just looked like them. Right? It could have looked like that guy. Right? He called them self-transforming machine elves, though. So it was probably, they were probably a little bit more detailed, and anybody who's been in DMT space has met them, so you know. Um, and in fact, what they said is don't give way to astonishment. They said, look at what we're doing and do it. And the elves were singing, right? Which is, they were using their breath. And so Terence McKenna started to sing and use his breath, and he had an amazing time and some really cool revelations. Right? This is, again, so we have tendencies to overreact. Does anybody else have a tendency to overreact? Just me. Okay. Some people overreact. Sometimes we have tendencies to anticipate. right? We think we know what's coming. Does anybody think they know what's happening in the future? Right? They act like they do. And we have tendencies to manipulate. We try and make reality conform to our will, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, and usually doesn't work with psilocybin, right? There is a thing, there's a tendency, I talk about tendency, there's a tendency in our culture right now in this moment where we think of psilocybin as tools and as medicine and as things to be used to produce a certain result. And on one level, okay, I get it. That's the way it is, and that's useful sometimes. A deeper way to go with psilocybin, with mushrooms, is to see them as teachers, right? As opposed to like you don't necessarily go to school and tell the teacher what they're supposed to teach you. I mean, there is controversy sometimes of people going to university being like, you have to give me an A and you have to do, but if we're going to a master, right? And we can think of mushrooms as masterful. They have been around doing this thing for tens, if not hundreds of millions of years. And if you think of them as coming as the beings that came through space and actually seeded life on the entire planet, it's probably closer to 4 billion, right? So mushrooms have been around doing this thing for a long time. They kind of know what they're doing. It usually seems like they're doing it for our benefit. And so a really good way to not overreact, not anticipate, not manipulate, not panic, not give into astonishment is to cultivate humility, right? So this is a really good practice, is to come to the mushrooms with deep, deep humility, and to, you know, relax as deeply as you can. If you're new to this and you are thinking of going on a journey, if you are thinking about doing a higher level journey, if you've yet to go to 5, 7, 10, 15, 20 grams, and that's something that you want, um, then you would probably want to practice um, deep relaxation, yoga nidra. If you type yoga nidra into um, uh, YouTube, you'll get a bunch of things where it's a progressive relaxation practice when you do lying down. You can also type in body scan. You can do breath practices, pranayama, working with the subtle energy of the body, yoga and tai chi. Um, we were talking at the beginning of class that there is a great teacher named Kalindi Ii. I'll type his name in the chat. That Kalindi Ii was a proponent of very high dose journeys, 20, 40 grams, and he was a martial artist. And in my mind, one of the ways that he was able to navigate those spaces successfully and come out sane was because he had a strong internal martial arts practice, internal energy practice. And so that is my tips for successful and wonderful psilocybin journeys in 10 minutes, right? It's 10 minutes of a tip. And so I will. So Saad, do you think I should take questions and then you go, or do you want to go and then we'll take all the questions?
I think maybe just for the sake of the recording, if we wanted to exclude questions, I think maybe we should have questions at the end.
I knew, brilliant.
Cheers.
All
Okay, so
right.
let's go into my presentation then.
Yes. So I will spotlight you and I'll take me out. Thank you everybody for your attention, and open your heart chakras for Dr. Saad.
Okay, let's see. Can you guys see my screen at the moment? My volume clear? Cool, awesome. Okay, so hello. Thank you for coming today. Thank you again, Daniel, for this idea of a collaborative event. Seriously, I'm so grateful to be just holding this space with you. And again, thank you everyone for attending. So this molecule of the month is psilocybin. Okay. A little bit about me. I am the founder and CEO of Psychedelic. I am a co-founder of the Oregonian nonprofit, the Psychedelic Pharmacists Association. I'm also the vice president of the Psychedelic Club of Pittsburgh. I'm a director of the Allegheny County Pharmacists Association. I'm also a community pharmacy manager. Today, we will talk about just a brief overview of our current mental health landscape, and then we'll get really into the nuts and bolts, high level of psilocybin. We'll talk about how it works, some side effects, dosing, some contraindications, and the potential indications for use. And then I do want to touch upon this idea of healer inclusivity. So let's go into mental illness. Mental illness can take many forms. It may affect mood, thoughts, behavior, and these symptoms that come up can snowball into problematic or even debilitating life complications. Here are just a handful of different symptoms associated with mental illnesses, from fear to sadness, altered eating habits. The mental health landscape at the moment is poor. 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. experience mental illness each year. The prevalence and incidence of major depressive disorder is pretty high. In the US, depression rates have actually tripled during the COVID pandemic. And that was a statistic I found like probably maybe 4 or 5 months into the pandemic. So it's been it's not the best. When we get into depression, the American Psychiatric Association defines major depressive disorder as a common and serious medical illness that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, how you act. It is one of the leading causes of disability worldwide. Depression causes feelings of sadness, loss of interest in activities that were once enjoyed. Now, when it comes to how we treat, the gold standard approach to navigating depression is generally with antidepressants. These will be your SSRIs, your SNRIs, so it'll be like your sertraline, your citalopram, fluoxetine, all the teens in there. And some issues with these antidepressants is that one, it's really grounded in an antiquated approach to how we view depression to come. There's also a lag period of about 2 to 6 weeks before therapeutic action is even observed. There's a high variation observed in treatment response. There's actually one study that had a head-to-head of antidepressant with placebo, and they found that the antidepressant they utilized was only 15 to 18% more effective in symptom reduction than the placebo itself. And then additionally, more recently, there was a meta-analysis published called the STAR-D report. What it found was that, again, it just really reaffirms that that our approach, the gold standard approach to navigating major depressive disorder treatments, they don't work. Additionally, when it comes to the potential ineffectiveness of managing depression with antidepressants, there are also a whole slew of common side effects found that either leave people not adherent to their medications, or they just do not want to seek this gold standard of care. So this includes excessive sweating, sexual dysfunction, nausea, agitation, increased appetite leading to weight gain. And these are just a handful of the side effects seen. Now with that, I think it's a good segue to talk about psilocybin. We don't need to have a reason to pursue psilocybin as an option for just mental health. Again, I think that really comes down to this idea, the fundamental idea of cognitive liberty. However, as a clinician, it's great to just say, hey, there's a lot of really cool research here. There's a really great safety profile. And again, the mental health landscape, like when it comes to treating depression, it hasn't been revolutionized or evolved in about 5 decades, over 40 years. We have advancements in cardiology, to immunology, to oncology, pulmonology. It's amazing. But when it comes to psychiatry and relating to generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, we've been doing the same thing since like the 70s or 80s. And it's just, we need more. And I think that what we need to be doing now is educating, advocating, and just trying to have constructive conversation. So I'm hoping that this presentation can at least give you some nice points to talk about with your community, your family, and even maybe policymakers. And then maybe we can try to get some decriminalization, established in your local area, and that's a step in the right direction. But with that said, let's get into psilocybin. So how it works, psilocybin is a serotonin 2A receptor agonist. Okay, serotonin and psilocybin look very similar. I'll put up the molecules side by side here momentarily. The time to peak is between 60 to 90 minutes. The half-life is roughly 3 hours. And then the duration of action for the psilocybin experience is between 3 to 6 hours. Now, when you look at half-life, a nice tidbit whenever you see the word half-life, it means like the time until the plasma levels of this molecule in your blood is 50%. So what pharmacologists generally look at is you multiply the half-life by 4 or 5, and that's when you can assume that this molecule is out of your system completely. So in roughly 12 to 15 hours post ingestion, psilocybin and psilocin will be cleared out of the body. It won't be active on any drug tests. And drug tests don't even really screen for psilocybin, primarily because it's more expensive to include in the panel. And then additionally, this half-life, less than a day, it's out of the system. Again, here's that picture of serotonin on the left-hand side, and then here's psilocybin. Now, when we talk about psilocybin, it is important to note that psilocybin, although it is like the cool molecule that everyone talks about, the real person that's doing the work is psilocin. So psilocybin is a prodrug. A prodrug means that it needs to be metabolized endogenously by an enzyme to then change its structure so that way it's actually active. So we see that with a lot of medications, for example, like clopidogrel. Okay, that's a prodrug. It needs to be metabolized and then become its active metabolite, so that way it can help prevent like blood clots, for example. So now here we see psilocybin in the middle, and what happens is that it gets dephosphorylated. So this group right here is a phosphate group that gets cleaved when it enters in the body by an enzyme called alkaline phosphatase to turn into psilocin. This is right here what, again, binds to the serotonin 2A receptors to induce its psychedelic effects. Essentially, the 5-HT2A receptor is the psychedelic switch. So you see that all with the classical hallucinogens or classical psychedelics. That would be like your LSD, your DMT, your mescaline. We'll talk more about this every month. So I'm looking forward to having more of these conversations with you guys. I'm sure some of you have seen this really cool picture. If not, we'll talk briefly about it. I believe it's from the Beckley Institute. I wish I put a citation there, but what we see here essentially is brain imaging, fMRIs of placebo volunteers and psilocybin volunteers. And these little circles around the circumference is essentially what they call hub regions of the brain. And these are the different connections communicating between hub region to hub region throughout the brain. What we see here is that there's so many more, just a lot more interconnectedness throughout the brain on psilocybin. So this is your brain on drugs, essentially. And with that said, it'll be nice to try to talk sequentially about how this happens and how it relates to the psychedelic experience. So step one, psilocybin prodrug is metabolized to psychoactive psilocin. Psilocin binds to the 5-HT2A receptor, and then that receptor now is activated and releases glutamate. Glutamate is the excitatory neurotransmitter, and it's predominantly found in the cerebral cortex. It's like one of the most advanced parts of the brain. Now, these receptor regions, or these hub regions, are activated to enable even more interconnectivity, seen in that previous picture, to improve the brain's ability to be dynamic and flexible. Essentially, that idea of neuroplasticity that we hear very frequently. This leads to what some researchers, including Robin Card-Harris, is the idea of pivotal mental states. I really recommend people just to read into that and get a good understanding of it. The pivotal mental state, it's very reflective of essentially just the fundamental idea of how neuroplasticity allows for more habit formation, and that during this pivotal mental state, we have this increased malleability or plasticity in the brain, which promotes an opportunity for transformation. However, also depending on your set and your setting, which are crucially important terms when it comes to preparing for a psychedelic experience. When it comes to that pivotal mental state, if you have a poor set and setting, or if you're not having any support and you have such malleability and you're heightened awareness, it can actually be traumatizing for some, or it could be a very bad trip, right, as people call it. There's also other folks that spin it more as like it's a challenging experience and it's a learning opportunity. But I know some folks that they, with different compounds, like they are actually re-traumatized because of the lack of a lack of set and setting. So set and setting are extremely important here when entering into a pivotal mental state. Additionally, some researchers have expressed that mental rigidity can actually lead to depression, to anxiety, to different addictions and OCD. So overall, like what psilocybin does is it diminishes this mental rigidity by enabling crosstalk, neurogenesis, neuroplasticity throughout the brain. Now, I'm going to read this quote word for word by my good friend Manesh Gurin. He's worked closely with Robin Card Harris from Imperial College of London. He is the person I look up to when it comes to making sense of the psychedelic science as objectively as possible. I'm not sure if many of you have heard of like the default mode network and how what happens is the default mode network shuts down and all these other areas come up. So apparently that's actually not very grounded in the science. It's just a very easy way to try and like conceptualize it. Because what happened is the reason why is that those hub regions that we see, there's a lot of overlap between those hub regions and like the default mode network. But like if you look at it, I mean, for example, alcohol diminishes the default mode network, but you're not having this interconnected, like spiritual, transformative experience. Like I said, this is not the case. So I really think it comes down to a lot of the glutamatergic activity we see upon the 5-HT2A receptor activation, which allows for this concept of like consciousness dilation, is what I like to call it. But with that said, I'll go ahead and read this word for word for you guys. And again, thank you, Manesh, for this. So psychedelics via 5-HT2A receptor activation increases the excitability of neurons in core hubs of the brain, and this leads the brain to enter into a highly interconnected and dynamically flexible mode of function. On the psychological level, we may experience the state as a highly sensitive one in which our typical patterns of thinking, perceiving, and behaving are less stable, and we're intaking much more information than we're used to. This in turn gives us an opportunity to revise our fundamental beliefs and assumptions in a way that's either positive or negative, depending on the context, setting in which we have this experience. So I really think that this is a great way to summarize like what's sort of going on here, and try to be as objective as possible about the experience. Now, when it comes to some side effects, I hope you guys remember the list of side effects seen with the different antidepressants. Here are the main side effects, and a couple of them are. One of them actually is more made up that the Silent Health team and I put it together. When it comes to, I'll start with the acute side effects. Those are the more like during the experience, the day after the experience, and they're temporary. That transient is just temporary. We have that transient anxiety. Daniel spoke about that transient anxiety, essentially saying don't panic, because usually the incline of the experience or the come up of the experience, the energetic states that someone taps into, that can really be allow for people to be more prone to a state of anxiety or panic. So we do see transient anxiety in like a very high percentage of patients that have underwent these clinical trials. Additionally, nausea is there, headache is found, and that's actually more dose dependent and generally happens the day after the experience. Anecdotally, apparently hydration is the most important thing to try to prevent that dose-dependent effect of the headache the day after the experience, but that's just anecdotal evidence there. Additionally, you see fatigue the day of and the day after. You have transient elevations in blood pressure and heart rate. So if you have some serious cardiovascular issues, this may not be the right modality for you, assuming that this is legal or decriminalized or you're going to a retreat. And let's see. Oh yeah, and then another thing I want to talk about is diarrhea and vomiting. So I listed here as a side effect because most people don't want to have diarrhea or vomit, but in some communities, some cultures or traditions, and we should remember that this isn't new medicine. This isn't a new compound. The research is newer, but this has been around for hundreds of thousands of years. So a lot of the indigenous traditions actually they would like their they're sick or they're ill or they're the people they're hosting to purge these toxins, and that the vomiting process is actually like a way of purifying the body. It's kind of how some people look at it. So I listed here as a side effect because generally people don't want that, but depending on the way you perceive diarrhea and vomiting from the experience, it's actually wouldn't even be listed as a side effect. It'd be listed as one of the active effects. Now let's get into some of the chronic side effects I have here. So there's two chronic side effects that I believe are worth discussing. The first is this idea of MOS, or maladaptive ontological shock syndrome. And I'm still trying to put the best descriptors on it. Daniel and I had a really cool conversation not too long ago, trying to really make more sense of it. But the idea here is that, we have ontological shock to where, we have a paradigm shift. We look at the reality completely differently. And that can be amazing. That can be so great for you. But it can be maladaptive if people or folks are, consuming larger doses of psychedelic medicine and they're not integrating, they're not applying the insights to their reality. And like they're just, there's no, I guess really just a sense of reality that's true to them, to where, again, it's maladaptive. Like their actions, their behaviors are just, they're not being, they're not taking care of themselves. They're not being, they don't have to be a constructive member of society, but fundamentally, if you're not taking care of yourself and your sense of reality is all over the place, I think it's important to try to ground oneself, so that way we don't have this as a negative effect from the experience. And then the next chronic side effect I believe worth mentioning is valvular heart disease, or cardiovalvulopathy. So this is very, we haven't seen it in practice, right? We haven't seen it in practice. There's not enough research out there to determine whether or not this actually exists. But I'm going to let you guys know why clinicians should be aware, why people should be aware. Essentially, what happens is that psilocybin, as we mentioned, in terms of psilocin binds to the 2A receptors to induce the psychedelic effect, right? Now, psilocin also has affinity, or it can bind to different receptors of the other serotonin subtypes. So that includes like the 1A, the 1C, but also more specifically the 2B receptor. Okay, so the 5-HT2B receptor, because of the affinity to that receptor, we've seen in the past, specifically with a drug called fenfluramine or dexfenfluramine, otherwise known as fen-phen, it was pulled from the market back in like the early 2000s or so. It induced valvular heart disease, cardiovalvulopathy, leading to mitral regurgitation, pulmonary hypertension, which is very serious. There's no treatment for it. It can lead to death. It's very lethal. The fen-phen acted on the 2B receptors. Okay, so now again, we don't have any evidence that psychedelics, specifically the classical psychedelics, can induce valvular heart disease, to my knowledge. There may be some anecdotal evidence out there. I have not seen anything yet, but it is something to be aware about. We primarily bring this up more for the cases of chronic microdosers, people that microdose pretty frequently. When it comes to like a large dose experience every 6 months, again, we need more research out there, but I don't think this is something that can be concerned about at all. But when it comes to microdosing and not taking time off, especially if you have a family history of any cardiovascular issues, like this is something to take into consideration. Okay, so what I'd recommend is, if you have the access or the ability to do so, maybe look into getting your heart checked out prior to embarking on your personal psychedelic journey, prior to microdosing when it's legal or decriminalized, or if you're in another country where it's legal to do so, just so that way you have a baseline and then you come back and just check it out. Okay, so yeah, those are the acute side effects that I believe are worth mentioning, and then those are a couple of the chronic side effects. When it comes to dosing, I'm referring specifically to dried psilocybin cubensis mushrooms that are grounded up. And I really emphasize ground dried psilocybin mushrooms, because although we've seen that psilocybin and psilocin are both found pretty evenly between the stems and caps, there have been some research articles that have been published to say that the caps might have more psilocin and psilocybin content versus the stems. So just for the purpose of dosing predictability, consistency, it just makes sense to grind up the dried mushrooms, so that way you can like anticipate and really optimize any protocol or any dosing schemes you want to have. So that said, microdosing, we have it listed from 0.1 to 0.3. A light dose, we have from 0.3 to 1 gram. A museum dose or the concert dose between 1 to 1.5. A normal dose between 2 to 3. A higher dose, a high dose from 3 to less than 5. And then a heroic dose coined by Terence McKenna being 5 grams. I showed this to Daniel, and he laughed, saying, "Oh, you're only going to 5?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, man! Like I didn't even know that we was able to scale anything higher than that." So anyway, that's a rough overview to psilocybin dosing when it comes to the dried mushroom. It's a little bit different when it comes to cGMP psilocybin, which is the psilocybin, like the synthetic psilocybin or isolated psilocybin found in the clinical trials. Again, a lot of what we understand about how psilocybin works comes from the clinical trials or anecdotal evidence. Now, when it comes to the dosing of cGMP psilocybin, what I started doing is I just multiply either the dried mushrooms by 6.3 to figure out what would roughly be the actual psilocybin like cGMP content itself, or I go to those studies and see what they have. Usually they do like 25 milligrams. I'll divide that by 6.3 to see roughly how many grams of mushrooms that would be. It's not really as accurate as you'd like it to be, but from a lot of the calculations I was able to do, that was probably the most precise. So yeah, 6.3 is the number that I've been using, the team has been using here. And then this is just some of the common effects associated with the with the dried mushrooms. And when it comes to contraindications, two of the common contraindications seen based off of the science would be schizophrenic tendencies or family history of schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder. They also usually screen patients out that have had a suicide attempt or suicidal ideation in the past year, I believe. But we really just need more research to navigate this, because I think that there is definitely a way to approach this a bit more with a bit more inclusivity in mind. But we really just need more research to navigate that. And when it comes to the research, here are a list of potential indications and the studies underway. There's a lot of promise here when it comes to psilocybin being utilized for a variety of indications, from major depressive disorder to addictions to cluster headaches to microdosing, creativity, PTSD, opioid use disorder, even phantom limb pain. And that list is only growing. This was a list I put together about 6 or 7 months ago. And if you're keeping in touch with some of the articles coming out in the news and the psychedelic space, there's even more coming out now. So yeah, there's a lot of potential. And we can get into the clinical trials if we'd like, but I figured that maybe it would be nice just to, I know I'm at 25 minutes now, maybe it'd be nice just to do a Q&A here. And then someone said, can we see the possible effects screen again? Yes. So this is actually adopted from the third wave. I forgot this was in this slide deck. But some of the common effects here are listed here, from the museum concert dose to have some like mood enhancement, some mild visuals, some introspection, to the more heroic dose having that mystical experience. And one thing I really want to point out is that the mystical experience is highly correlated to positive, like long-term outcomes. So it's really great to try and make sense of the mystical and to really recognize it and respect it, because when it comes to finding that healing, that the mystical experience is a huge correlating factor to doing that. So with that will conclude the presentation. We have some questions here right now. Before we answer some questions together, I would like to put in a PDF, a little handout that I made today to share with you guys. Give me 1 second. I'll put it in the chat. It'll take me a moment to do that. But yeah, thank you
Good
guys.
stuff. And then it'll be in the notes when it's on YouTube. We'll have a link to
Cool.
it and stuff. Thank you for that. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
you are